With the Investing News Network, I'm Scott Tibbles, and today I'm having a chat with Remi Piet, who is Senior Director at America's Market Intelligence. Thank you for joining me, Remi.
Hi, Scott. How are you doing?
Always a pleasure. So today we're going to have a chat about Suriname. Now, we've chatted about Suriname in the past. It is a Caribbean country in South America, and there are quite a few mid-tier gold players operating there. First up, there's IAMGOLD. They're listed on the NYSE and the TSX. They've got 4 mines, including the one in Suriname. They have the Rosabel gold mine, which they have 95% of. It's a fairly reasonably sized mine, 289,000 ounces of gold in 2018. And then you've got Newmont. They have their very large Marion mine, which eventually they want to produce 500,000 ounces of gold a year. So the last time we talked about Suriname, we were focusing on IAMGOLD. They had an incident in August last year. There was the death of an illegal miner who got onto one of their properties. He was shot by the police. And then shortly afterwards, the company laid off hundreds of local contractors. So there have been quite a few developments recently in Suriname, Remi, namely to do with their president, Desi Bouterse. Can you just give us an update on what the situation there is, what is happening in Suriname?
Well, Suriname is a very particular country, and starts obviously with the personality of the president. So Desi Bouterse has been elected already for 2 different terms, elected in 2010 and 2015. However, the past of Desi Bouterse has made headlines, obviously in the country, but also in the international press, although Suriname is not a very well-known country. Desi Bouterse has been condemned for drug trafficking by Holland in the past. He is also the former dictator of the country in 1980, and he was, as I was mentioning, elected in 2010. Yeah, so Desi Bouterse is very much a populist president, answering to the needs of his population just ahead of the elections, and then ruling by very large level nepotism and obviously not the most democratic rules of the country. He was elected. Has to be underlined, but he's been also accused of killing some of his opponents in 1980 when he was a dictator. So especially in 1982, there was an event in Fort Zeelandia where 16 of the main opponents to the rise of Desi Bouterse just after the country became independent from Holland were slaughtered in Fort Zeelandia, and Desi Bouterse is considered to have personally killed at least a handful of them. The big news is that there was a decision by the court of Suriname that has been investigating this event 27 years down the road, that if took the decision of condemning the president of the country to 20 years in prison. So that's a very large development. Obviously, the country has been facing a series of sanctions in the past, and as I was mentioning, apart from the drug trafficking condemnation of Desi Bouterse, there has also been a series of arrest warrant from Interpol in the past. The son of Desi Bouterse in prison in the US. So that's a very specific situation politically. The key change here is the fact that obviously this condemnation is being appealed by Desi Bouterse, but is going to be plaguing his bid for potential re-elections in the upcoming elections of May 2020. So going down to the bottom line on this, it's very likely that Desi Bouterse will not be re-elected in May 2020 in a country that's been basically ruled by his own hand for the last 10 years. And it's urgent for obviously mining companies operating in Suriname, but also investors looking at the country to understand the logic of the opposition in Suriname, the NDP, the VHP and ABOP. VHP is the Chan Santoki led party of the opposition in Suriname, and the obviously a lot of positions that mining companies have had in Suriname. Some of them having worked too close probably to distributors, especially in the management of their informal miners and mid-scale miners that were linked to the presidency in Suriname, would be urged to encouraged to really set bridges with the opposition leaders and try to already agree on a series of best practices to be able to implement if there's a change of power, which is very likely in May in the country.
Mm-hmm. And given that Newmont and IAMGOLD are quite significant companies, we can see what they've been doing. So can you tell us a little bit about how have they been navigating their way through the situation in Suriname and other miners there, and what should they be doing in these quite turbulent times for the country?
Well, the properties of IAMGOLD and Newmont are very different in Suriname. IAMGOLD is operating in the Brokopondo district, very next to the Saramacai River, in a very interesting deposit, Rosabelle, that has been producing and has been also finding a series of new developments next to the mine site. So it's a very interesting project indeed. Also, an interesting project is the Newmont project Merian, which is next to Marengo, but a little bit they were able Newmont to develop the project a little more away from the presidency in area where you can actually probably invest in the neighboring of the mines without having too much presence of mid-scale miners, specifically informal miners that have direct link to distributors. So one of the key issues that IAMGOLD has faced, apart from obviously you mentioned the event of the demise of one person on the mine site and a series of laying off and issues with specifically a contractor on the Rosabelle site. This situation has not been the case in Newmont, and there's very late in Merian. There's very less links between informal miners and distributors around the Merian mining site. Obviously, when you try to develop a project in a country like Suriname, you cannot not have relationship with the presidency, and in most countries, most jurisdictions is the case, but especially in the case of Suriname. And the issue here is to be very careful about assessing what kind of relationship has been put together and making sure that you have a way to continue to operate on sustainable and legal framework and very, let's say, professional best practices governed approach. If after the distributors term, and be able to assess the kind of links and promises that have been done with distributors. The reputation of the two companies is very different in Suriname. There's ways to improve this, especially for IAMGOLD, as I said, by working as soon as possible, probably doing already, but being very clear in terms of engaging with the opposition parties in Suriname on a framework, an agreement with how they will operate the mine and what is their commitment to local content, to creation of value, and so on, so that do you have clearly an alternative and a strategy implemented with opposition parties and the new incoming regime in May 2020. When you're looking at smaller actors in Suriname, there's a myriad of small junior miners and exploration companies. The potential of Suriname is staggering in terms of reserve. It's the Guyana Shield, especially in gold mining. But obviously, it's very much a pioneer mentality in some of those jurisdictions. When you're looking at Suriname, you're looking at Guyana also. You have Portnokers, you have Garimpeiros, you have a series of informal miners operating illegally in the country, and you have to be able to know how to operate in jurisdictions where the quality of equipment, the quality of the business ecosystem is very much different from a very mature jurisdiction like Peru or Chile, for example, in Latin America, or others, or Canada, or Australia, obviously. So the mentality of the junior miners have been very much a geologist mining, which is great, but also a speculative approach to hoping that down the road, after this potential political change, they might be acquired by investors. This is something to very much look at closely because, as I'm saying, the potential is there. Corruption is obviously present not only in the NDP party of Désiré Bouters, but also in somewhat in the opposition parties. But that should actually be a little bit better in terms of the quality of the institutions. And when this is actually put in place, the importance of mining is so important for the country that the regulatory stability is there. But there has to be a clear strategy and a clear approach, probably with third parties or with people able to build bridges with the opposition party to make sure that, you know, there is consistency in terms of how they operate after the elections, and that links with the former regimes are properly assessed, risks are mitigated, and you can continue moving forward with sound investment and large production in such a jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so that's a bit on the operators that are there. But if I'm an investor and I'm outside looking in, thinking about investing in Suriname, what should I be thinking about? What companies should I be looking at? What kind of situation? How am I doing my due diligence?
So if you're an investor looking at potentially taking, you know, additional participation inside, for example, IM Gold, you want to be very careful about how they implement changes, and they've done a series of progress over the last few months after the events in August, and how they understand the change of regime in Suriname. If you're a potential investors looking at, you know, acquiring an up-and-coming exploration-minded junior mining company, or if you're looking at just, partnering with some interest in Suriname, there's limited, obviously, capacity of investment inside the country, but there are some small projects that can be further developed or explored. If that's the case, then obviously you want to be as clear as possible from the Désiré Bouterse administration right now, because it's not only, as I said, under scrutiny internationally. It has been the case for several decades, but now it's facing condemnation domestically, and very likely will end up in jail unless there's even the idea of the scenario that was the likely scenario last year of some kind of a truce between parties, and that Désiré Bouterse would be able to walk free, or be kind of not at least under very specific jail sentence, negotiating with the opposition towards democratic transition in the country. That scenario is less likely today, and it's going to be very important and clear to understand who are the key players inside the VHP. ABOP is the other political position group, but the VHP is this coalition that is more likely to be able to rise to power in May 2020. And so the idea is really to understand what is, and liaise with them, understand who are the actors that are likely to be the next mining minister, or running the mining regulation body in Suriname, and already try to socialize your project, and try to socialize, even if you're already there. When I'm talking about IM Gold or Newmont, when you're already there, it's Newmont is already doing a good job, but it's clearly to specify how you plan to operate over the next 2 to 5 years, how this will actually be integrated inside a national program for mining development in the country, and understand the potential changes that a new regime can put in place in the country.
Okay, and so looking at that election, is it looking like a clean sweep that the opposition is going to be rising to power? Can we see poll numbers? How do we do our research on that? How do we know?
Well, it's first of all, it's a very specific country. I mean, the arrival of Désiré Bouterse, his election in 2015 re-election in 2015 was probably not a surprise. His arrival to power in 2010, especially looking at his past in the 1980s, something that's some observers have been taken aback by it. But you have to factor in the unique charismatic capacities of Désiré Bouterse, the specificities of Suriname as a country that where voters can be swayed in fairly, I wouldn't say fairly easily ahead of elections with a couple of goodies and gifts, but the maturity of the democratic regime is limited in Suriname, and the capacity to work on traditional, let's say, linkages. It's not an indigenous land, but it's an area where you have to understand exactly how the population is organized, and how they abide by certain levels of relying on mid-tier powers and representatives that then supported the Désiré Bouterse. So you have to get a clear idea of how regional politics with key families work in Suriname. And therefore, when you're looking at this, whether who's going to win in up and coming elections. I wouldn't be as elections are always tricky and uncertain. In that case, I'm saying the decisions of December against Guterres is obviously playing candidacy for re-elections in May 2020. But the up and coming weeks and months are going to be very important to see if you have the capacity of the Chen Santoki led opposition to really play as an alternative, or if you have a potential schism also inside this party. There's different political figures and it's a coalition of different smaller parties. It's not a united party, and so that's what you have to look at. But obviously, we're looking here, especially this coalition of party was very uniting, all demanding the resignation of Désiré Guterres last month. It's still probable that it will run united towards the up and coming elections. But this is exactly what you have to do, and the homework that you have to do to really understand this. It's a fluid situation in Suriname, and it'd be interesting to see who are the main actors that will arise as the people that you have to have already socialized with, and you have to have already talked to ahead of it, ahead of the elections, to not just arrive once the elections pass and understand what is the logic. You want to have built a certain level of relationship, carry interviews with them, understand their positioning, and therefore be able to once they're elected, to present something that is very much along the lines of what the third parties interviews would have done ahead of the elections, to understand what kind of words you should be using.
And let's talk a little bit about Butterse himself. So what does his support look like? You've said that he's quite a charismatic leader, and obviously he has connections in the informal mining space. So I suppose that what I'm getting at is... And
he had money also. Let's be very honest, in the sense that he was able to shower people with gifts.
Yes. So obviously he has backers. Who's supporting him in the country now? Is it the business community, or is it a bit of a mixed bag?
Well, his backing ahead of the 2010 election was very much linked to these activities as in some criminal activities. He's been charged and found guilty for drug trafficking. Okay. So let's put it out there. So that, the idea is he had criminal backing. He also had the money to be able to shower with gifts. And once you're arriving as a charismatic leader, there's a limited pool of potential politicians in Suriname, and the backing behind it is that you should usually follow the leader and the one that is in power. Now that it's very interesting to look at, the reaction to the condemnation to 20 years of prison. Interesting to see a certain level of independence of justice. You have to underline things when things are actually working right. And there's many countries, that we consider as much more developed and industrialized, where you would not have had the jail sentence against a sitting president. But so you're seeing this as alternatives that become, sort of what I'm saying is that the sentence has obviously limited the support and traditional support that Butterse was having as probably being the front runner and potentially sweeping the next elections. And these there's a feeling of the population that voted for Butterse in 2010, when the events of 1982 were known by the population, but it was very unlikely that there would be a follow up on this. And then in 2015, he was just running for re-elections, already having his hands in power, and therefore that was probably an easier bid. That situation today, really brings water to the mills of people that just didn't want to have Butterse for a third mandate. And that's why I don't see, despite his traditional links within the population, his capacity to control a lot of the institutions in the country, is very extremely hard for him to rig elections and to potentially say that the entire country was behind him when you're a political leader. That he could have done. He was able to do this when he was international court or Interpol saying this, and could actually run up the idea of international cabal against him. When it's a domestic court that actually charges him after a lengthy trial, he cannot claim that this is the influence of international powers.
And so you said that it's quite difficult to rig the system. The system seems fairly fairly solid. Is he actually allowed to have a third mandate constitutionally, or has he changed something about that?
I mean, elections, you can always try to rig elections. You can rig elections by just, adding votes in the ballot box. What I'm saying is that in a small country like this, it's obvious. You can see it. Whether you're able to actually then, pressure for, and we've seen for Morales in Bolivia or whichever, of trying to have the democratic change that has been, decided in the elections. That really depends on the level of balance of power domestically, internationally. Here in the case of Suriname, as I was saying, that's a game changer. Is that the balance of power domestically is changing also, and therefore as a result, it'll be very hard for someone under condemnation that is seeing his basis of local power, kind of being a little bit shaky following this, to be able to all out try to rig an election in such a small country. We're talking about a country that is below 1 million inhabitants, and as a result, it's in India, it's harder to control every single vote. In Suriname, it's a little bit easier.
Okay. Sure. Well, Radio, we'll leave that there. So looking forward, the Suriname election is projected to be held in May. Thank you for having a chat with me, Remi.
My pleasure, Excel.
And that was Remi Piet, Senior Director at America's Market Intelligence. I'm Scott Tibbles with the Investing News Network. You can find us at investingnews.com, and feel free to follow us at Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.